Good morning, you guys, and welcome back to the Hidebound Convivium. It is currently May 18th, 2021. Probably going to try to get a couple of shorter videos up on the channel today. But the topic of this morning's sort of unstructured rant, which is what I've been using some of my free time to do, is sort of collect my thoughts and do these sort of off the cuff talks. So the topic of today is going to be about psionics, psychics, extrasensory perception, and how these tropes are used in science fiction settings, and what they sort of symbolically represent in the science fiction branch of the speculative fiction genre. As some of you may have noted, I've been basically taking a few videos to sort of break down meta-narrative threads that work within science fiction settings, because of my belief that science fiction is an important part of culture making going forward. So I think that tackling these sorts of overarching sort of meta-narrative threads in the science fiction genre is very helpful for writers going forward to understand what exactly are the intellectual bases, or what is the there's sort of a dual factor communication sometimes in science fiction. So you want to talk about what's actually being portrayed, as well as what are the implications of what is being portrayed, and what does that say about the worldview of the author, and what the author is trying to communicate. So today we're sort of talking about psychics. And usually the term of art that's used in a lot of different science fiction is psionics. And depending on how you want to define the term or use it in a loose or strict sense, there are myriad science fiction settings that include psionics. As a matter of fact, there's probably more that have it than don't have it. So, just some brief off the cuff examples are Star Wars with the Force. Most superhero universes have psychic powers of some kind. Obviously, the X-Men, a lot of them have psychic powers, like Professor X is a telepath, etc. Foundation, which is a foundational space opera science fiction text, has light spoilers, has one particular very prominent telepathic sorry, a very prominent character with psionic capabilities in the second book. And Dune, of course, also has psychic powers in the form of precognition and sort of. In Dune, I think it's a little bit understated as compared to something like maybe superhero comic books, but it's there nonetheless. And you can also talk about sort of universes, like gaming universes, for example. Most science fiction strategy games have psychic powers. So, like Warhammer 40K is the one that jumps to mind first. And what psionics are in these settings is that it's basically just magic by another name. So you want to have people who can blast things with their minds in your setting, but you don't want to commit to you want to maintain the scheme, the mental scheme of this is, as I said in the earlier novel, or sorry, the earlier video I made, the Darko Suvin sort of framing, where this is an alternate empirical situation. So it's not magic, it's psionics. What that really means is that it's uh it's a science, really. It's the science of melting things with your mind. And really, psionics is an engineering approach to the desire to have sort of magic in a setting. Really, what it's a manifestation of is the desire to have enchantment in a setting, because you want, basically, no setting I think is really complete without, to borrow a turn of phrase from quantum mechanics, spooky action at a distance. People expect, I think people have an intuitive, expectation of the world that it is not purely mechanistic, that it's not, um, just billiard balls bouncing into each other, that there's some kind of unexplainable, superluminal force that lies behind the normally understood operation of the laws of physics that allows us to do really creepy, spooky, weird things. People have this intuitive sense that if there isn't something, if they don't believe that something like this actually exists in the world, they believe that it ought to exist. Essentially, human beings have this understanding of, maybe to borrow like a biblical framing, human beings have this understanding that there is a second realm, so to speak. There's the realm of the of material world, and then there's the realm of spirits or forms or whatever, sort of immaterial thing you want to, you want to posit, right? So for a Platonist, right, this is the forms. For sort of traditionally religious people, this would be the spirits, angels, and demons, and so forth. But at the same time, this is a science fiction setting, and so you want an engineering perspective to this spooky action at a distance. It's like, and there's a strain of this, right, in traditional religious experience, where people compile these demonologies, and they categorize demons and angels, and they organize them into all their different sort of phylums, and they give them names, and they give them histories. And it's the same sort of impulse, but with a more generalized, sort of, uh, it's a more generalized approach to this second realm that people want to include in this fictional world, but it doesn't inherently fit the framework of the quote unquote alternate empirical circumstances. And psionics as a word actually does it is explicitly an engineering concept. It was made up in the 1950s by paranormal psychologists who believed that you could use machinery and scientific processes to understand, codify, study, and replicate a psychic phenomenon. So it's fundamentally scientistic, and it allows your science fiction setting to have your cake and eat it too. You can have your, essentially what you could do is imbue the world of the setting, which is by its nature as a science fiction setting. It's the first realm. It's the realm of the billiard ball atoms that bounce into each other. You can imbue that with the kind of depth that the reader wants and expects, where he adds the second realm on top of it. But at the same time, you can maintain the framework of this alternate empirical vision by systematizing and categorizing it. And the way that the second realm, the psionic realm, so to speak, manifests in these settings is with very visual, blatant, empirical phenomenon. Psychics in these science fiction settings, they shoot lightning out of their hands. Their eyes glow, and beams of energy come out of their head, and it's things that people can see, they can touch. They're evident to the senses in a way that we require in this alternate empirical framework. So what I want to pose is that for any science fiction setting, that wants to that wants to have the second realm, this superluminal realm, or this realm of the forms of the spirits, and you want to include this in a way that's scientific and systematized, then psionics is a it's a useful tool, but also as a trope, it falls prey to the sort of problems of it inherently kind of cheapens um, and the sort of manifestation of these things, and it introduces them in a way that is not really um, it's not really consonant with what these things are. It's not an accurate description um, of the second realm. So we often say in Christian communities, sometimes people have this tendency to treat prayer as a kind of like slot machine where you pray and God either answers you or he doesn't, and it's like flicking a lever on a nickel slot. And it's not like that at all. And we don't want to give that impression um, based on how we include this sort of second realm in our writing. If what we want to communicate is this enchantment of the world and the fundamentally complex nature of the universe as being more than just billiard balls bumping into each other in the void, we want to be sure that we don't participate in the tendency to over mechanize, to over elaborate. And in fantasy, there's a similar sort of tendency in the fantasy genre where people will include magic in the world because, of course, a fantasy world has to have magic. That's sort of one of the defining characteristics. And people want to create these very complex rules for how the magic works. And what they end up doing 9 times out of 10 is they turn it into a form of science. Magic is just a science that they have in this alternate world, and we don't have it here because the laws of physics are different. That that's fine and it's interesting, but it communicates fundamentally the same thing as we are billiard balls um, bumping around in the void. It's just that sometimes the billiard balls can bump weirdly, or they can bump in unexpected ways that they can't bump in our universe. So I would say overall, psionics as a science fiction trope, very interesting, very useful in moderation, but you have to be careful that you're actually saying what you want to say with it. And this is especially apparent when you talk about the origin or how it works, and you can analogize it to magic, where fantasy writers end up saying things that maybe they don't intend to say by the way that they structure the world and how magic works within it. They want to turn magic into science. And you have a writer like Tolkien, for example, who's very clear that magic is not a kind of like it's not a science. It's not a kind of technology that could be harnessed by like, for example, Gandalf doesn't have a lightning bolt gun in the form of a wooden staff. We know this because in the book he constantly just takes his staff and hits people over the head with it rather than magic them to death. Why does he do that? Well, because magic in Lord of the Rings is not it's not a technology. And so it's the same sort of thing with psionics. What we end up doing is we start making the second realm, the mental world, the spirit world, or whatever you want to call it, we start making it into a technology, which is fundamentally not what it is. And when you do that, you kind of start to end up with a disjointed uh, approach to world building in the setting, I think. So that's my 2 cents, rather, my piece and my 2 cents on psionics. Um, As I said, it's useful in a science fiction setting, but you have to be careful. You have to be careful as to what is being communicated by the way that you introduce it into the story. Um, and that's my piece. So y'all have a good rest of the day. God bless, and I'll talk with you later.